So everybody out there watching in cyberspace as well, welcome to Bedford United Church. Welcome to all of you on this, I suppose it's July the 1st weekend, even though July the 1st is a Tuesday. It's still the July 1st weekend sort of thing, right? Is that what we call this? And so I was wondering what to talk about with you today. And the first thing that popped into mind was just to tell you that about a month and a half ago, Kinza, my daughter, was married. So, yeah, thank you. She was born in this church, she was raised in this church, and now she's 27, and she's met a fella who Danielle and I really like. So it's all good, right? It's all good. Doesn't get any better than that, except, strange coincidence that it be, 2 weeks later, I turned 70. No, thank you. I turned 70. I could use all sorts of descriptors, but I couldn't believe it. I absolutely couldn't believe it. And Danielle will vouch. There was a little bit of a time in there. You know, I presided at Kinza's wedding, and I'm there, and it's all kind of wonderful and joyous. But there's this little bit of, sort of this observation, I don't think I'm old. Well, I don't think I'm old. I don't feel old. I don't think I act old. I don't think old, I don't think. But when you hit 70, you know that you're in this kind of last stage of this whole thing we call life. And it's kind of sobering, for goodness sakes. Anyways, thank you for clapping. That's great. Makes me feel better. Anyway, so Kinza's wedding took place. Danielle and I were driving around. We were at Kinza's wedding. It was a wonderful, joyous kind of event. And I know that Kinza would say thank you to all of you for having been such an important and special part of her life in terms of raising her. It's been a wonderful place for her. Anyway, so we spent more time in Ontario. We were driving around. We were meeting lots of friends. And in all those conversations with lots of friends throughout Ontario and friends that we've gone through life with, there was lots of conversation and commiserating about getting older and all of that kind of thing. But whenever the jokes would sort of, crack jokes about turning 70 and so on and so forth. And then the conversation would move a little further, but the conversation would move away from the worries about aging, and the conversations would inevitably sort of move towards people's worries about the present state of the world. People are worried about the present state of the world. And some of our friends said, we've got kids who don't want to get married because they're so worried about the present state of the world. How many of you are worried about the present state of the world? Put up your hands if you're worried. Well, that's just about all of you. So are you thinking this worry is not a good thing. The present state of the world is not a good thing, but this worry is also not a good thing. So I was reading this passage from Scripture that Val just shared with us a couple of minutes ago. Jesus lived in mega stressful times as well. Jesus lived in times when people were incredibly anxious and distressed and depressed about the political state of affairs in the ancient Middle East, and Rome was running roughshod and rounding up people and crucifying people, doing all sorts of terrible things, and people were really scared and anxious and worried. And in that context, Jesus shares these words that Val shared with us earlier. Which of you, by worrying, can add a single moment to your lifespan? Right? Which of you by worrying can add a single moment to your lifespan? He says, stop worrying. Enough of worrying about tomorrow. Let tomorrow take care of itself. Today has troubles enough of its own. Pretty pragmatic. Now, I was going to say earlier, I don't think Jesus, and I was going to say some kind of Rastafarian sort of easy-go-lucky, but I was thinking you got to take that word out, Rastafarian, because the Rastafarians are actually very spiritual, very good people. But Jesus was no kind of, it's no big deal, people. Just smoke a little weed, drink a little wine, and everything will turn out all right, right? Just don't worry about anything. What are you worried about? Don't fuss about things. No. That's not where Jesus comes from. Jesus is much more thoughtful, much more profound than all of that. And Jesus recognizes how corrosive worry is to our mental and physical well-being. Just think about this. And I suspect Jesus knew what a lot of contemporary psychologists and doctors know very, very well. Jesus says, which of you by worrying can add a single moment to the span of your life? And what we know today is that worry actually detracts from the span of our lives, doesn't it? Worry actually injects all sorts of cortisol and other chemicals into our body that are actually destructive of our physical well-being. So worry actually detracts from the length of our lives. Jesus also knew that worry sucks out the joy and the goodness in life for us. Worry has this, life is an incredible gift. It's this incredible blessing from the Creator, the sacred source of all life. But when we're fixated in worry and worried about worry, it just sucks out the capacity to experience life the way God wants us to experience life. And let me add this, and this is really important. Worry doesn't help anything. And worry doesn't change anything. It ultimately doesn't make any difference in things improving. I think it's something that people, and all of us are in this boat, who are very committed to changing the world and making the world a better place. And we're very committed to things like social justice and the social gospel. But what often happens for us, people who have those kinds of commitments, is we start to believe that the results of our activity depend on us. We think that it's my doing that's going to change the world. And that's the mistake. When we start thinking that it's my efforts and my doing that's going to make the difference, we kind of tune God out of the equation. And when it all starts to depend on us, and it rides just on our shoulders, and then we don't see things change, that's when depression and anxiety and worry starts to kick in big time. When you reach 70, there's something that happens. All of you who have reached this, I'm not going to ask you to put up your hands if you don't, particularly you women, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but for those of you who have reached that wonderful stage in life, you will appreciate what I'm about to say. What I'm about to say is this: when you reach this magnificent age, you develop that absolutely wonderful, profound observation that it's been said before, I'll say it again. What goes round, everything changes, but everything stays the same. Even Jesus said, Jesus said it numbers of times, wars and poverty and famine have always been there, and they will always be there. When you've lived this long, you start to see how everything changes and everything stays the same. So I want to say, this is a quick comment. When we engage in changing the world and trying to change the world, we engage in social justice, for instance. Rather than thinking, I'm going to make the difference and I'm going to change it and it's all going to get better because of my efforts, think about this. The reason we engage in those efforts is to change not the world, but us. The point is, when we engage in action, we become changed. And then we become part of a much larger process of change that doesn't just depend upon us, but depends on all of us, all of it, and most of all depends on spirit. There are two poles in life, two important ingredients in life that we all have to recognize. One is action, and one is contemplation, okay? So Jesus was a pragmatist. We have to engage in action in our lives, okay? We have to take responsibility for our bills, for making a living, for raising our kids, for whatever jobs we've got at Bedford United Church this summer. We all got to do that stuff, right? We got to make money. You got to make money. You got to prepare for university, all that kind of stuff. We all have functional responsibilities that require action and activity, and that's all good. But when our attention, and that includes working and changing the world, but when our attention and our hearts become absorbed totally in just that action side of life, it's easy to lose our way. It's easy to lose track. It's easy to become worried. The other side of life is the contemplative side of life. And music is such a huge component in the contemplative side of life. And I think what Jesus is encouraging us in this reading this morning is that in order to walk through life with resilience and with strength and courage and with joy, we need to also cultivate our contemplative side in life, our contemplative bent. We need to cultivate the spiritual kind of perspective that Jesus brought to the world, the spiritual perspective that is God's perspective on life. And I need to say to you, so often, so this is what I want to say on this weekend. This summer, what I want to encourage all of you as we go into the summer is typically a time of a little bit more relaxation. Use the summer to cultivate your contemplative dimension, your contemplative muscles in life. Because ultimately, cultivating and strengthening the contemplative dimension of our life is the best antidote to worry, anxiety, and depression. How many people turn, and in the summer included, you go to the cottage and that's the whole deal. You buy a couple of cases of beer, you have your wine, maybe you do that other stuff that they do these days, have been legalized, whatever it all is. Alcohol and drugs, including prescription drugs, are not the best antidote for worry. The best antidote for worry is cultivating the spiritual dimension of your life, the contemplative side of your being. Now, what does that spiritual side of life, what does that spiritual perspective consist of? Well, that spiritual perspective consists of trying to think about life and to ponder life through the gaze of eternity, not the gaze of the everyday. When we become caught up in the everyday, just it's here and now, just the world has been around a lot longer than us. It's going to be around a lot longer than us. And if you think about the soul dimension and our spiritual journey in life, that goes far beyond the 70, 80, 90, 100 years that we might live in this life. So can you cultivate kind of thinking about life and reality from God's perspective of eternity? That's one part. Second part of cultivating the spiritual dimension in life is learning to see the presence of Spirit everywhere. So that's why I always said, the Spirit in me, Kevin, the Spirit in me, Chris, honors the Spirit in you. The Spirit in me, BUC, honors the Spirit in all of you. Look into each other. Do this again. We haven't done it in a while. Take a peek in each other's eyes. Turn to one another. Take a little peek. Look in each other's eyes. Try to see beyond the eyes. Try to see deep into the other person's soul. Try to see that this isn't just a mortal body that's going to kick off in, however many years. There's a spiritual being and dimension that lives within each of us. And that spirit is around us and permeates all of reality. But if we lose that sense, if we lose touch with that reality, then whatever's going on in the politics between the United States and Canada and around the world, in the Middle East and in Ukraine, we will become totally depressed and anxious. We have to learn to see the presence that Spirit is alive in everyone and everywhere. And Spirit's alive in Ukraine and in Russia and in the Middle East as well, trying to engage people. And there are all sorts of people there who are in touch with Spirit and who are making a difference as a result of Spirit. And these crazy political things will also pass eventually. And when you see the presence of Spirit everywhere, you start to recognize that we're all connected one to the other. We're not alone in this great big world, and it's that sense of aloneness and loneliness that is such a distressing source of worry for people. So we're not all alone in the world, and we can see that we are connected with God and life and the universe and each other. And finally, what happens when you get to be 70? I like this. I can play with this now, right? When you get to be 70 and wise like I am, you start to recognize that this little ego, this little me, that is David, ain't going to be around forever. And this little me, this little ego, is not so all important. And this little ego's body is going to knock off here one of these days. And I don't know what's going to carry on after that. But if I haven't trusted and cultivated a deep relationship with Spirit, that too is going to cause me worry. I'm going to be real anxious about that. But when I recognize that I might not be here, but God will still be here. I'm not so important, but God is important. And whatever happens to me, God will still be. And you give less importance to who you are, and that starts to diminish worry as well. Cultivating that spiritual perspective on life, the contemplative dimension of life, in addition to the active side of life, is the best antidote for worry in a world that is constantly seeking to generate anxiety. How much time do I still have? I guess I better wrap it up here. I had a whole other sermon I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about the chatterbox in the brain. There's a chatterbox in the brain that would love to go on right now. So there's this chatterbox in the brain. It's called the default mode network, and that's what I was originally going to talk about, but I think I've said enough probably for now. So I'll talk about the default mode network another day, which is, I love talking about the science of all this. But let it just be said, as I wrap this thing up, As you go into your summer, reading a good book, walking the beach at sunrise or sunset, playing with your kids, listening to some wonderful music, doing a little meditating. That's what I was going to get into, but that's a whole other sermon now. Doing a little meditating, because the mind you recognize is this kind of chatterbox that's always generating worry and anxiety. And the more we watch the news, and the more we turn on social media, the more of that stuff we absorb into our mind, and the mind generates that. So I was originally going to title this sermon, as you go into the summer, the best contemplative thing that you can do is shush your mind. Say it. I'm going to shush my mind this summer. And put your finger up to yourself. Waggle your finger at yourself. I'm told I do this sometimes. I'm going to shush my mind this summer. I'm going to shush my mind this summer. I'm going to let my mind become quieter. Because when your mind starts to become quieter, then you can start to see eternity. Then you start to see spirit. Then you start to acknowledge interconnection. And when the mind is quieter, you recognize so much of what I think about me is just generated by my own crazy thinking. So I got to let that stuff go. Developing the contemplative side of our lives, contemplation, is the antidote to worry that Jesus is trying to encourage. And I recommend it highly to you all this summer, Bedford United Church. Amen.